If you use apps and online marketplaces to buy your secondhand clothing, I'm sure you've been wondering the same thing as me recently. What the hell happened to Depop? Hi guys, I'm Lottie, and today I thought it would be super fun to go back in time and look at Depop's history, particularly where it first began and how it gained its early popularity in its golden era. I'm then going to be looking more at the decline and kind of plateaued use of Depop and what caused this, and then finishing on its kind of attempted comeback that it's been doing recently and what it's been doing to try and bring itself back into popularity, you could say. Just for reference, this is all based on Depop's popularity in the UK, and I'm basing this video a lot on my personal experience and use of the platform. So I will be mentioning its use a little bit in America and Australia. However, this video is predominantly going to be based on its popularity within the UK. So I just wanted to make that super clear, as I know it's currently a lot more popular, I think, in the US than it is here. So without further ado, grab yourself a drink if you want. I've got a classic cup of English breakfast tea with me today. And yeah, let's get into it. Okay, so we're going to go back to the very beginning and look at where Depop first began. Depop was founded in 2011 by a man called Simon Beckerman. Depop was founded originally on two main ideas that he combined into one. So the first was Instagram and social media. Back in 2011, Instagram was still kind of very much in its early days. This was around almost like the very starting era of social medias. So he wanted to take the social visual elements of Instagram and then combine this with one of the biggest secondhand online clothing marketplaces at the time, which was eBay, kind of like one of the OGs basically.
Instagram just came out. This was October 2010. And during that period, I was trying to figure out how to do this e-commerce. And I thought, let me try and do and design an app. Basically, more or less, this is how Depop came out. I designed it to be a social network because I saw that this was something that was coming up. People were starting to get used to this paradigm, which was the home feed. You followed someone, you could see what they were posting. No? So with Depop, you could follow your favorite brand and see what they were listing. You could see what your friends would like and who they followed. So it was more or less a social, interactive way to buy and sell.
Depop saw a ton of success very early on in its career. It reached over 1 million users literally in its first year, which for a startup online marketplace I think is really impressive and really does show how popular it was when it first released. This early success helped to pull in a lot of investment. For example, they gained 1 million euros in 2013 from Red Circle investment, which for a startup is a huge amount of money, and they use this to really help boost themselves further in these early days of the company. So once founded, it originally actually spread predominantly through word of mouth and through social media at the time.
We have a marketing team who used many traditional ways of growing, buying advertising. We do Facebook advertising, Google advertising. What else we do? Influencer advertising, influencer marketing. That's not advertising. Influencer marketing, where we, for example, we have this huge blogger on board called Chiara Ferragni. She's her Instagram account has 16 million followers or something like that. And she joined in 2014, and she's probably one of the most famous Instagrammers, bloggers around. And she joined as an ambassador.
For those of you who were on social platforms like Instagram at the time, you'll be quite aware that it was fairly different then to how it is now. You know, I'm thinking this was like prime indie sleaze era where everyone's feeds were aesthetic, they were themed, there was so much white and, you know, filters, and people used to post a ton of photos, not just of themselves, but anything kind of aesthetic. You know, I'm thinking, oh, the Polaroid pictures, Arctic Monkeys, vinyl and CD covers, Lana Del Rey, Lush items, ripped tights, bruises, cute makeup, colourful hair. Oh, I can't forget American Apparel. Those tennis skirts were everywhere. So these early influencers who kind of dominated Instagram during this time, they get sent a ton of clothing from online shops, you could say, and then they'd basically receive this clothing for free in exchange for wearing it and tagging the brand in their photos. This gave them clothing to post in and therefore kind of ideas and bits for their content, and it gave these brands lots of exposure through the audience that these photos would reach. And mind, this is the time before ads had to be disclosed.
Do you remember the era of Instagram? It must have been 2015. Does this trigger a memory or not? It's a good picture though. It's a good nail art. They did very good. This random watch brand just decided to solicit a bunch of nail artists to do nail art inspired by their watches, and like we all just did it. This was before sponsorships, before the FTC knew what Instagram was. This is before anyone doing this kind of thing understood what you should, what you can't do. There was no real guidance on what to do, how to do it, how to disclose or anything. Someone was like, hey, we'll send you a nice watch, and I was like, okay. Like, I don't know. It was the Wild West of marketing, yeah. This would never happen today. You had to be there. You had to be there.
So how does this link to Depop? All of these influencers were being sent a ton of items, posting pictures of them, and then they would do big dumps of their clothing on Depop, and everyone would be frantic to get a hold of a piece. Like, in my mind, it was like these items had been touched by God. Like, they were holy. People like Joanna Kutcher, for example, who I was obsessed with during this time. I was so desperate to get a piece of clothing that she had actually not even touched, but worn. My Depop, the only people I followed literally were just all people from Instagram, as I loved their outfits, their aesthetics, and I really wanted to get hold of their clothing. And mind, in the UK, during this time, there wasn't really anywhere that kind of competed with Depop. There was eBay, but eBay didn't have that same visual aesthetic elements that Depop had. Depop was literally a grid like Instagram, and it still had a very much that visual aspect that Instagram had in showing the clothing. It was a much more engaging way that for young people such as myself compared to eBay to browse clothes and buy them.
In general, Depop is a mobile social shopping app. It is like a combination of basically eBay and Instagram put into one, and it is honestly the most easiest thing to use. It's basically like Instagram. It has like a feed, you can follow people, you can like their stuff, and then has also the ability of eBay where you can buy stuff at the same time. So it's basically kind of like on the website it says it's a kind of community, which is so true because you can like and comment on people's items, and it's just so easy to use. Like, you can even private message the people. It's kind of like, it's like a social networking app, but just like for selling stuff, which is so much easier than eBay because eBay is so like confusing with their like terms and conditions.
Depop had been doing quite well for a number of years now, but approaching the late 2010s, teens, what are they called? Approaching the end, there was definitely a shift in how people used it and how it was viewed. And I think there are three main big reasons which kind of contributed towards its decline of use in the UK. So firstly, the number one reason that there was such a big change in Depop, I think, has to be the shift from it being a hub of personal sellers and people selling their personal items to a commercial business hub. So people caught on to the fact that a lot of money could be made on Depop through selling clothing, and this gave a lot of people the idea of buying excess clothing, aka like wholesale secondhand clothing, and then reselling this to make extra profits and kind of form their own secondhand clothing business, I guess you could say. And this was done with a ton of vintage clothing, which can be bought very easily in bulk in wholesale online. It's what a ton of the actual vintage shops around the UK, I'm sure, do as well, because they can't. I mean, clothing can be sourced individually and picked out from charity shops, but it's so much more efficient time and money wise to buy it in bulk wholesale online. You can buy different grades of different quality clothing.
This is where vintage shops get their stock. We're a vintage wholesaler, specialising in women's wear from the 90s and 2000s. So cute. We sell vintage clothes in bulk for a lower price for resellers and vintage shops to sell. Our handpicked studio holds thousands of super cute pieces like this and this. Love that. It's honestly a thrifting dream.
And so people began to do this and set up their own vintage Depop shops, and this changed the whole space. It suddenly wasn't about people selling their own items and their own wardrobe just to make a lot of extra money. It purely became about making money from a business sense. People were just wanting to shift these clothes because they'd actually bought them in to sell in the first place, and of course they'd sell them on with a markup attached to them. So during this time there was definitely a shift of Depop going from quite kind of a reasonable secondhand clothing site to becoming expensive. And this change is, I think, really well represented by the sheer amount, if you look online on social media, particularly on YouTube, for example, of videos that were created 2019, 2020, even 3 years ago, on how to make money on Depop. In addition to this, people started doing drop shipping on Depop, which technically is not allowed, but people still did it. The marketplace was also flooded with all of these similar items which literally looked exactly the same as items on AliExpress, and you know, you could buy it on there and they'd often have like different colors available, or say in the description different sizes, and this was a key giveaway to how you knew something was often actually shipped.
Depop banned it. Basically, they said if you're a drop shipper, you can't be a seller on Depop, which totally makes sense because it is a form of fast fashion, which is not good, and Depop always, you know, wants to promote sustainability, but people have found a way around it. So basically what they do is they order in bulk the inventory from these wholesale places, usually from China. They get it sent to their place, so they actually have to hold the inventory, and then when people place the order, they just send it from their place. So like, it's not technically drop shipping, but they are ordering the items themselves and then sending it out themselves.
Yeah, Depop face this a lot, and they're still trying to crack down on it, but Depop is still rife with drop shipping. Secondly, I think one of the big changes that also influenced Depop was the shift in social media during this time. So social media, particularly Instagram, had shifted a lot, and by 2018 and 19, it was not the same place that it used to be back in 2014, and they weren't still being sent items for free to promote. And as social media shifted quite a bit, Depop didn't really adapt with the times. It still had so many old clunky features, like it never introduced any kind of regulated shipping postage. That was still absolutely wild and could be whatever people added on themselves. And there was generally just far less kind of word of mouth being spread. They didn't have any new features being released on there to keep it up to date and modern and talked about. And I think it simply just dropped off of a lot of people's radars as a lot of other new alternatives started popping onto the scene. Thirdly, in the UK and actually in a lot of Europe, alternative and I'd consider better social media, secondhand kind of online marketplaces and apps has started popping up, which began to almost steal and gain a lot of the popularity and user base that Depop had. For example, by 2019, Vinted was actually already making double the revenue of Depop, which I think shows how Depop had stagnated, and a newcomer like Vinted, which had so many better features, had simply just overtaken them and gone straight past them. I think this portrays really well Depop's kind of lack of ability to keep up with the popularity and new audiences. I think they lost a lot of their older user base who noticed that Vinted was, I think, a lot better in so many ways. It's definitely not perfect, but for the average person who just wants to shift a load of their secondhand clothes from their wardrobe or buy other people's items, Depop just did not fit that bill anymore. And so they, jumped ship to other sites like Vinted, which is purely just for personal selling, and commercial selling is not allowed on there, which is another reason why it's also a lot cheaper compared to Depop, which by this point was renowned for being really expensive, although it did contain some absolute gems of vintage sellers and people making their own clothing.
I was a Depop top seller for 2 years, and in May 2021 I stopped selling and I haven't opened up the app since. 99% of my wardrobe is secondhand and it's bought from places like Vinted and not Depop. I can't afford Depop now personally, and when I was selling on there I was very conscious of that, and it's because you do have to give a good amount to Depop. Vintage is just so much more self-aware. Basically, if you've got something from like a cheaper site like AliExpress or like Primark, you just list it as from there. People will likely still buy it because it will be a cheap price, and also it stops the item from going to landfill. So it is a good place to go if you've got fast fashion things that you want to sell. When I left Depop, I was quite angry at the organisation and I didn't like the app anymore. I didn't like the selling platform anymore. And if you'd like me to go into that, I can do another video on that.
I think Depop also noticed this shift of their user base and downfall in their popularity in the UK at this time, as I have noticed they do seem to have shifted a lot more of their time, money and attention to the US. For example, they unveiled their first physical store in LA in 2018, which they definitely had not done, as far as I'm aware, in London or the UK. So I think they were experiencing a lot more success in the US and were simply turning their attention more to there for pop-up shops and kind of push harder towards a market which I don't think had as many good alternatives like Vinted, for example, which is Europe only. On to what I'm calling Depop's attempted comeback. So there was a big change in 2021 when Etsy actually acquired Depop for £1.1 billion.
Etsy announcing a major purchase this morning, acquiring fashion marketplace Depop for about $1.6 billion. Around 90% of Depop's active users are under 26 years old. Okay, Etsy saying that this will help the company push deeper into the coveted Gen Z demographic. And
as they state, one of the main goals of this was to tap into the huge Gen Z audience base that Depop had. They saw Depop's user base and was like,
I think, we could access Gen Z people through Depop. That could be really useful to us.
Yeah, Etsy had been facing its own issues with its aging user base and not really engaging with younger new Gen Z audiences, but that's a whole another different issue for another video. If you would like me to delve into Etsy and their recent issues and I guess what some could almost call the start of the downfall, do let me know, as I've seen a lot of other videos bubbling around online, a lot of chatter around it recently, and I'm kind of itching to jump on that train and share my thoughts and bits on it as well. So as Etsy came in and they weren't technically really in control of Depop. Depop was still acting as its own standalone company and was simply just an owned subsidiary of Etsy. However, I think with new, maybe overseers, potentially different shareholders and people invested in the business, they definitely started to introduce quite a few new changes in the last couple of years. One of the big ones that they did was remove the seller fees, which they did in March earlier this year, which is huge.
Long story short, the Depop seller fee, which used to be 10%, has now been completely scrapped, but there is a payment processing fee, which is the Depop payments at 2.9% plus 30p. And if you look below, it says the payment processing fee for Depop payments will remain and is charged on the total transaction amount, including shipping costs and any taxes. And for all buyers in the UK, it's up to 5% of the item purchase price plus a fixed amount of up to £1. I want to know your thoughts about this one, people. A lot of people are saying that they're trying to compete directly with Vinted, as Vinted do not have any seller fees at all. Let us know what you think about this one, people. Is this good for sellers or is it bad for buyers?
I personally think they copied this probably from Vinted, which saw quite a lot of success with this policy, and it's probably one of the reasons why items were cheaper to start with, and why a lot of sellers liked using Vinted was because they managed to keep basically 100% of the money that they earned from their sold goods, whereas for Depop, prior to this policy, you had to give Depop 10%. However, Vinted has a different policy where they make the buyer pay a kind of buyer protection fee when they buy an item.
Yeah, there's 10% fee on each Depop sale if you didn't know that, plus a 4% transaction fee, and I think PayPal charges 50 cents plus the transaction fee for each sale. And then also, if you boost your listings, that's an extra 8% that they take, which I think is, like I said, I just think that it's crazy how boosted listings were further down in the search than I thought they would be. I thought they would all be at the top. And then if the seller pays for shipping, then that's also a fee that is taken out of the profits. And if you are a seller and you sell stuff, you have free shipping, but your prices are also low, and you sell on Depop and you pay for shipping, you're not making anything. You're only making a couple dollars per sale. And I've actually had sales where I go in the negative, because if I have an item for $10 but it's heavy, like it's heavy shoes, and shipping is $14, like I literally go into the negative and I have to pay PayPal or Depop whatever I owe, and it's so crazy.
So I think due to this, a lot of sellers had been turning to Vinted and other sites where they were maybe cheaper or just no selling fees at all. I think it's a little bit too late. Yeah, well, we'll see. It's still a very new policy, so I'm not entirely sure on the full effects that it's had on Depop. Another new thing that Depop introduced was their new offer structure, which is quite similar, I'd say, to how eBay's offer structure works, where you basically get a time frame, I think it's just 24 hours on Depop, where the seller can send an interested person an offer, and they basically have this limited time frame to accept. I personally don't think this is still as good as Vinted's offer system, where you have an infinite amount of time to accept that offer, like it doesn't ever expire. Interestingly, Depop also introduced something called their top seller program, which is a little bit like the YouTube creator program, but for just Depop and their kind of top sellers or kind of shop. This top seller program is invite only, and you have to meet quite a strict criteria. It's kind of like being a Depop influencer, I suppose. Like, you get a little blue tick to your name and you get to go to exclusive Depop events, and they promote you in certain ways. And I think the idea of this is basically so Depop can further boost your shop as a top seller, so they can basically get more money because you sell more goods, and in return these sellers get exposure to new audiences they wouldn't normally through Depop's marketing that they do for you as a top seller.
And you are looked at as more like certified and qualified to sell clothes on Depop. But to be honest, if I'm being completely honest with you guys, like, I kind of really get the same amount of traffic. I get the same messages. Can you do, can you give me 20% off? Can you give me 30% off? Can you do 10? Sis, the listing is for $25. You want me to give you, you want me to sell it to you for 10? Depop customers, I love them, then I hate them because they be so cheap. So yeah, honestly, it makes a difference, but not that much. I would say the best thing about becoming a Depop top seller is just that you get to reach out directly to, you know, people that are working on that app. Like, for instance, I thought my sales were like kind of slow, and I reached out to one of the ladies that works there, and she put me on a suggested seller. So I think that the suggested seller list, so I think that really is cool. But other than that, it's kind of the same, you know what I mean? It's like, you're a top seller, you still gotta work hard.
And does this attract in more users having these? I mean, again, it's like attracting in those who want to maybe sell clothing and items commercially through their own Depop shop, which I feel like Depop already kind of attracted those kinds of people. But maybe it helps or encourages sellers to advertise and try and bring in new audiences so they can sell more, which then also benefits Depop as well through more sales and getting more people on the platform. It'd be really interesting to see the statistics of how having this new seller program has actually affected Depop's revenue and user base. Finally, in December 2023, Depop announced it was doing a 6-month program with 11 of their top sellers in London, funnily enough. They said this was to encourage sellers to interact with their fans in real life, which, I don't know, it sounds so bizarre to me because I don't imagine there are queues of people eager to meet their top seller on Depop. Not the same as like Instagram influencer, but they're kind of acting like they have this, you know, this kind of user base of fans. And, you know, I could be wrong. Like, maybe there are top sellers in their shops who have fans who really want to meet them and engage and see their items in real life. I don't know, it'd be really interesting to hear your thoughts on this. I also scoured the web, particularly TikTok, looking for videos or evidence of these pop-up shops in London, and I could literally not find anything, which is so bizarre because whenever there is an event on in London, for example, like sample sales, the fashion girlies are always posting about it on TikTok, you know, showing off these queues going out the door, their little hauls of these cute sample bits. But yeah, for these pop-up shops, I literally could not find anything online, so I'm so intrigued. Am I missing all the hype around them? Is there a lot of hype? Or have they simply kind of just gone, you know, like under the radar, and in fact they have been a big flop and the reality is no one is talking about them? I'm so intrigued by this. So to wrap up this video, I want to look, oh my god, I'm so sorry. That is my cat in the litter box. She's so noisy. Wait, I'll just have to wait for her to stop. She's called Rosie, by the way. She's really cute. We're good. So to wrap up this video, I want to look a little bit into the future and what the future holds for Depop. Like, where is it going to go? What do I predict will happen to it? So I think it will continue to have quite a dominating presence in the US and Australia, where there isn't really as much competition to rival Depop at the moment. However, I don't think its kind of attempted comeback is going to have a lot of success in the UK. I think other competitors like Vinted have just, you know, formed such a dominant presence within the marketplace and stolen so much of the user base. I don't think it's going to take a few, you know, new offer changes and pricing switches to bring back all that user base when so many people have kind of left Depop in the past, particularly as it's, you know, it's not really what it used to be. I think Depop's kind of had its age, and I think it will probably at some point ditch its presence here in the UK. It might even move its headquarters from London to the US. I would not be surprised if it does this in the next 5 years. You know, I think it's still amazing and great for buying secondhand and particularly vintage or handmade clothing. Like, I think it has such a great collection of vintage goods on there that have been curated by individuals who really have a great eye and taste for this clothing. However, if you're looking to buy like cheap, everyday, modern secondhand clothing, in my personal opinion, Depop is not the one, and you're better off looking on, I mean, eBay is still great, or Vinted, my personal favorite, just due to the wide selection it has from buyers and how quickly stuff does sell. So that is everything for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you're interested in more content on secondhand clothing and marketplaces, I would love for you to subscribe to my channel and join this small but ever-growing community that we're building here. On a slight personal note, I'm still very new to YouTube and still finding my place here on the platform, but I just wanted to thank you so much for the kind of overwhelmingly positive response I received in my last video. I was really not expecting, you know, so many comments and so much engagement. I know it's really cliche to say, but it genuinely made my day. I'm just gonna keep making videos and hopefully bringing content that you enjoy. So share your thoughts on what you think of Depop now, your recent experiences, particularly if you used it a lot in the early days. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you in the next one. Bye for now.